Nestled in the heart of historic downtown Wilkesboro, the 1915 offers a wedding experience like no other. Once a federal courthouse and post office, the 1915 combines rich history with timeless charm. From intimate gatherings to full-day rentals, we provide the perfect backdrop for your most cherished moments. With indoor and outdoor options, bridal and groom suites, every detail is crafted just for you. Make your wedding unforgettable at the 1915, Wilkesboro's historic wedding venue, where your story begins.
Closed captions for this episode of Life in Wilkes is brought to you by Deal Insurance Agency in Wilkesboro, an award-winning, experienced, family-owned and operated agency with service and coverage that goes above and beyond expectations.
Join us on a captivating journey as we explore the charm, history, and vibrant culture of Wilkes County. Discover the hidden gems, inspiring stories, and remarkable people that make Wilkes a place worth knowing and celebrating. Join us now and experience the unique essence of life in Wilkes.
Well, good morning, Ken. How in the world are you?
I'm doing very well for a man my age and habits, Mr. White. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. And for people who know you, and even those who don't, imagining having a life full of stories and just literally being a newspaper guy, you pretty much get to know everybody, right? And through all of that, you're able to still smile and say, it's going to be okay.
I've met a lot of characters through the years, and most all of them have been pleasant. Yeah. And I love to remember about them, and they've all made me, I guess, what I am today. I don't know. Yeah. I like it when people say you're a storyteller. I consider that a kind of a compliment, So
I think that's it. I mean, we've talked a lot about your stories, and I've heard your stories, and not everybody does this, but as a storyteller, there are moments I'm listening to you tell a story, and I just stand there and listen, and sometimes you almost speak in their voice. I mean, it's not that you're trying to mimic what their voice actually sounded like, but it's like you're channeling them a little bit. I don't know if that's the right word either, but do you feel that way sometimes?
Not consciously.
So it's just organically happening.
Just part of telling stories, whatever you got. And the easy thing about storytelling with a crowd of people is that you can tell if they're with you or not.
That's right.
And that takes care of it. If you got them, if they're with you, that's all about it. And every group's a little different for reasons whatever they may be.
Right.
And if they're playing their golf game, I don't speak very long.
That's right. Well, let's tweak that ornament on the tree. I used a thing relating to the holidays now, right? Because we're right here in Christmas season. We're going to talk about the cold weather real soon. But when you see an audience and you've gone along and they're with you, and then something happens and you start to lose them, do you have a trick to get them back?
I'll tell you, the only times that I truly feel like I've lost an audience is when they had an open bar.
Oh, right.
And just to be honest with you, I don't do anything with open bars anymore.
Too much competition.
Yeah, boy. And don't take but one drunk, and I was one for a long time. I know exactly the foolishness that can go on. But anyway, so that's really the key to my thing is if it's not an open bar, I figure I can figure out a way to get through it pretty good, because a good story is a good story, and I'm proud to tell you I got a lot of good stories, and I love to tell them.
Yeah, that's great. Well, you and I have been talking throughout this year and in the warmer months also about what we were going to do as we get up to Christmas. And the weather in Wilkes County in this region, it had just been warm, and then one morning everybody wakes up and it's cold, right? I mean, didn't it seem that way? It was just like, where's it at? Oh, there it is.
Yeah, and it came with a vengeance. Yeah, it's really cool. But I do a lot of my outside time with my dog Angel, And of course, she's got her winter coat now, and I've found my winter coat. And so, but it's I like the weather. It's crisp. My mother always said, look forward to those real first cold snaps. They kill germs. She says, help us all have a more healthy winter. I don't know if she's right or not, but it kind of makes sense in a way.
Well, it kills the plants,
and
the summer plants.
But that's kind of what I think. But it's just I enjoy the winter. I really do. It's a good time, and so I'm glad to know that's what we're going to talk about today. It's some fascinating stories involve the weather.
Yes. Well, let's get started on that. Let's roll back to in the 60s, right? You were all this time. I think the story I'd like for us to start with, you were 10 years old, if I remember right.
I remember in 1960, I was 10 years old. That's correct. And I was 11 before the end of 60. But in the winter of 60, I was still 10 years old. I was in the 5th grade at North Horseshoe Elementary School. I had a wonderful, wonderful teacher named DeEtte Mason who read us stories about Miss Minerva, things I've never forgotten, and was one of those teachers that made you glad to have gotten to know them. And another good memory of that is the old North Horseshoe Elementary School that has since been torn down. It was originally built as a high school, but when I was in elementary school, the big building is now Benton Hall was grade 1 through 4, and the other was 5 through 8. And in 1960, it started snowing in March. And we were so tickled. It snowed. We get out of school, get to play in the snow, ride our sleds, on and on and on. But then it snowed again the next week, and again the next week, and literally it snowed every Wednesday for 6 weeks, starting in March of 1960. And I'm telling you, by the time that was over with, we were glad to go back to school. And it was really.
And you had a lot of snow, though, right?
Yeah. Oh gosh, it was, and it just kept piling on top of the other snow.
Right.
And but we played in it. We had a ball playing in it. But after a while, it just got to be work to walk.
Oh, sure. Because at 10 years old, I mean, obviously you had a ways to go to get as tall as you are now. So it would have been a drudgery, right? We've got some pictures from that time period that you had found. Somebody had given them to you some years ago.
A guy named Gene Stewart, I think, still around. I think about 95 years old now, gave me that envelope full of pictures from 1960. And you and I, it's funny, after you and I were talking about something to do the winter, I just ran across that envelope hunting something else, and it really kind of handy. But it's amazing, and some of the things that we have pictures of now are things that I remember from childhood. I can identify them, know exactly where they are, and always who was there, and that was there you go. It becomes my story,
Well, one of the things that I thought was interesting is there was a set of pictures that on the back it said the Douglas Inn. And then I remember previous stories that you had shared with me. And also, we had done a story in the past for Life in the Carolinas on 6th in Maine.
Right.
And that building is what used to be Douglas Inn, right?
That's correct. There's one of the pictures that we're going to be showing, I think, has a part of the Douglas Inn sign in it. And another one has a little thing that says rooms. It was a boarding house.
Right.
And that rooms sign hangs in the front window of my building right now, that very sign. An old gentleman named Henry Douglas ran that place. He besides the Douglas Inn, he sold specialty advertising, pens and pencils and cups and hats and stuff like that.
Do you remember meeting him?
Oh, many times. I delivered the newspapers to him and the guy right beside him at Bandbox Cleaners named B. Moore. They were both newspaper customers of mine. That's how I met them.
So you were, now when the big winter storm, the Wednesday storms, when that hit in 1960, were you doing newspapers at that time?
No, I did not get a paper out till the next year when I was 11.
Right, okay.
I'm glad I didn't have a paper out in 1960. I really am.
Right.
I delivered papers in the snow a few times, walking the route,
right.
And I can't imagine doing it in 1960.
Right.
But from the times of snow I got between 61 and 64 when I quit carrying the paper, they weren't they weren't story time storms. They were just little fluffy things.
Right. Well, a big storm is something that people often remember, especially one that's carried out for that period of time. What was life like for you and your buddies? I mean, you were at 10 years old and the snow out there. I'm sure you had friends. And what did y'all get up to?
Well, of course, I lived up on Henshaw Street.
Right.
And right next to Henshaw Street, there is a place called J Street. And J Street has an extremely steep spot. And then across the other side of across Henshaw Street, the other part of J Street was called Cowboy Robinson's Hill. And those places were great to go sleigh riding on. And why we weren't run over and killed, I do not know. But apparently it just wasn't our time. But we had a great time with that. But in the case of this year, there was so much snow for so long, it got where that it was so heavy, it was hard to ride a sled on it. And the Goodman boys had sleds, we didn't, but it got pretty tough. And so we'd found an old fender from a car. I want to say an old Chevrolet, but it was and we had cleaned it up and waxed it. And we would get 4 or 5 of us on it. We put a rope on it, and we'd go flying down the hills on it and had a great time with it. But and then down at the bottom of J Street Hill was what they called Toll Road. And it's now called Franklin Street, I think, but it was called Toll Road because at that time, really, it was the main way to get from the lower end of North Wilkesboro to the upper end of it safely.
Was it an actual toll?
Well, not when I was a kid. It was free, but still. But it was built and charged for as a toll road when it was first built.
Okay.
Yes. And people, and it was you just couldn't get there. 6th Street Hill was too steep. 9th Street Hill was too steep. 10th Street Hill was too steep. And the toll road, you could kind of ease your way up through there. But beside it, there was a place now called the Sidden Plant on there. There was a woodworking place. They made baseball bats, believe it or not. Yeah, among other things, But right beside it was a big field with a fence around it, and it's now full of trees. I mean, that was 60 years ago, over 60 years ago, 65 years ago. And it was the Matterhorn as far as we were concerned. I mean, it was
right.
We'd go up there and sleigh ride down it, and it got so much snow up there that it got and it was so cold, it crusted. And we would quite often take the sleds up there and ride on top of the crust.
So you were on ice, basically.
Literally on ice.
Right.
And you would fly. I mean, you can't imagine. And for us at 10 years old, it seemed like flying anyway. And then once in a while, you hit a bad place in the ice, and it would crack, and you drop down, and literally you were going up out of. You had to look up to beat yourself out of that mess to get out from under it, But the old fender was still the most fun because you could a whole bunch of kids on there at one time.
Fender, a car
fender, yeah. Okay. You put 3, 4, 5 kids on there at one time, and sit there as the snow would come in the hole where the headlight was and hit you right in the face, But Mark Goodman and I did all kinds of stuff as kids, and he got me into all kinds of trouble. I, as you well know, was a perfect child, certified by my sweet mama Carrie.
Part of that perfection, though, you'd go along with your friends' ideas, right?
Well, I was susceptible to him. He was a little older than me, so he knew more stuff than I did. But one time they were riding on sleds, and his little brother was on top of him, little Beanie, we called him. His name was Larry, called him Beanie. And as they came down toward the bottom of that hill, there was a fence, and Mark turned that thing, and they hit a hole in the ground, and poor old Beanie bounced off and literally hit the fence, and it had a couple of barbed wire straps and stuck there. And
he was stuck in the fence?
Literally, and it tore into his clothes some, and he couldn't get loose, and Mark wouldn't get him off of there. And he cried, but anyway.
Was Mark laughing at him?
Well, yeah, every breath.
Yeah.
But, and he got busted for it, though, because Beanie ratted him out. But, you think about stuff like to ride by that hill now, it's a bump in the road.
Right.
But like I said, to us, it was the Matterhorn. It was amazing. They didn't have anything at those ski slopes up in Boone that could compare to that, or Cowboy Robinson's curve, a 90-degree curve at the bottom of a big old hill, and you didn't know what was coming up that hill, but we still went down it. And then when we'd lose it, we'd go off into honeysuckles, and it would stop us from going way off down the bank.
Right.
We'd climb back out. We'd go home, not a dry thread on us.
But a few bruises, I'm sure.
But it was just fun.
Yeah.
And but it came every week, and it got to where I guess we had about all the fun. I really look forward to starting back to school.
Well, that was saying a whole lot for a 10-year-old then, right? Yeah. Wow. Well, that's what an exciting story. There's something. I don't know. There's an innocence to that, a little mischievous behavior, but you didn't have to, like you said, you didn't have to go to a ski resort. You didn't have to go anywhere. You didn't even have to have whatever would be considered the proper commercial sleigh of that day. You just needed a fender.
Yeah.
Would the fender, riding on the fender, I think I know the answer, but would the riding on that fender, would it go faster than the store-bought sleds?
Depending on how steep the thing was. Now, going down J Street Hill, it was not only was it fast, it was hard to control.
Right.
Now, see, with the sled, you had a guide on it, you know, but this thing was just. We had to try to do our leaning to get our everything, you know, and making sure everybody leaned in the right direction, you know. But we literally waxed it, and it was slick, and it would ride. It was a great ride. I'll never forget it. And but the thing making do is what we did.
Right.
So much we made do.
Did you know you were making do, or you just were utilizing what you had?
I never thought about it as an issue or a problem.
Right.
You just did what you had to do, you know. And you know, when we played cowboys and Indians, I quite often had a stick for my gun, and that was all right. And we weren't going to kill anybody anyway.
Right.
You know, literally. So,
right.
But it was just and always enough kids to get out and have a good time. At one time, we could get together a ball game for any kind, football, basketball, baseball, you know, anything that was going on. We had enough kids to get together and put together a team, you know. And it was just a good time. But the snow, that snow was so much of it for so long. I assure you that if I'm 75, and you find anybody in my generation of that age, and you ask them about the snow of 1960, they go, "Oh yeah,
right.
Oh yeah," and they nod, and they say it's 6 weeks every Wednesday. You know, and that's what made it so memorable. If it had snowed 6 times fairly close together, I don't know if anybody would have paid that much attention.
Sure.
But every winter was like, well. You know what's going to happen tomorrow. And it did. It did.
Well, that's amazing. And you're right, because now this area will get some snow, and it doesn't last long, usually, a few days or maybe a week at the most, just for it to go away. But you're right to have that repetitive nature. I mean, that's something that people in Alaska experience, right? And here it is happening here.
I used to hear my dad say, I've had about all the snow I need, And I used to say, I'll never say that, but guess what? I've eaten enough crow to spit feathers for a week about things my dad said that I would never say.
Right. Did you, what was it, snow cream? Like was that a thing then?
After the first snow.
Right.
The first snow cleansed the air and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And then after the first snow, my mother would make snow cream.
Okay.
And it was wonderful. I mean, my mouth's watering right now. I hadn't thought about snow cream in forever. Right. But it was a treat like no other. She'd put vanilla and sugar, but it was just wonderful. Mm. But not after the first snow.
Yeah, that's a smart thing to do.
Yeah. And again, she was always proud of winter. She said it made you healthier to get through winter,
Well, I think that might be right? Gives us a break, gives us a mental break too. That's a good thing.
And my mother was a consummate cook. She fixed 3 meals a day, 7 days a week. That's the way it was.
Did she have a specialty that she did in the winter? During the cold weather. During cold weather, what she do a little bit different then?
I don't remember anything being particularly different for the winter,
Well, she treated you kind of special anyway, year round, right?
All the time, yeah. It was, as I've said many, many times, it's a good place to be, her baby boy, yeah.
And a little contentious, though, with your siblings. That would have been...
Well, my next older brother never got over not being the baby. Oh, wow. My father told me that, and he said, but, the fact you reminded him of it every day didn't help much either.
Did you occasionally get away with things that he probably wouldn't have?
I could have got, I was treated, well, I've told the story about the burning the woods down.
Right.
And if I got through that unscathed, you can figure I pretty well had it made.
Right.
And poor Mark, he always got busted.
Right.
Like.
Well, but somebody's got to take the heat, right?
But it was a great life to be in, and I'm glad more than I could ever tell you that in that next year I did get that paper route, because that's the nearest thing to being an independent businessman you're going to be in those days as a little boy.
I wonder if that the big freeze kind of set you free, and you realized you could survive extreme cold weather. So getting out doing the paper when it's not so cold, that's not so bad, right?
Well, I never made that connection particularly. Right. I just and we played in all kinds of weather, and I had to be back by dark, that kind of thing. We would go to town, sometime walk all the way to town. And the Liberty Theater was open, and we'd go to the movies sometimes and things like that.
Do you remember one of the winter shows during the snow? Did you go to the theater then or not?
No. When it was snowing and messy, we pretty well hung around pretty close, for that, But because it literally got to be so much snow that they were having trouble keeping it scraped off, and I remember where Memorial Park is, now where the ball fields are and stuff. Right. They would dump snow there. They still do that sometimes. Right. But anyway, it was way deep in the spring before those big piles of snow were gone.
Wow.
Wow. Yeah.
Well, that was a late snow too, wasn't it? I mean,
sort of, yeah.
Because for March, so you didn't that year. Did you have snow at Christmas, or was it a late snow year?
I do not recall, but we now then had a white Christmas now and then, but nothing like 1960 was completely an anomaly. Mm-hmm. I mean, like I said, if you ask 10 people my age about that, all 10 of them are going to say, oh, I remember the snow of 60. But you ask them about the earlier part of the year, they'll say, I don't know. Yeah. Because it wasn't an event. Those 6 weeks was an event.
In that packet of pictures that you shared with us, there were pictures in Deep Gap, and there were pictures with these massive icicles hanging off buildings. Do you remember seeing that in North Wilkesboro as well?
Oh yeah, especially off commercial buildings and stuff, because it stayed cold and it warm up enough to drip, and those things were just layers of icicles. Yeah, right. I mean, if they fell on you, they would hurt you. Right. You could get yourself hurt.
Well, in those pictures, we saw people standing and grown men standing. I don't know if it's actually up to the waist, but it wasn't far from that. Yeah. So is that a good illustration of how it was in North Wilkesboro? Because Deep Gap's just up the road a little bit, right?
Yeah, there were lots of icicles. The whole thing, it was just we were just covered. Everything was covered. I have no idea how whether the factories ran and stuff like that. I had no idea about that. I was just a little boy, Right. But it was certainly what was on your mind every day is how you're going to get where you're going to go,
Well, as a 10-year-old, if those pictures were with grown people it was high on them, that a 10-year-old, it would definitely be high on you. Then,
there were some huge ones. It just depended on how the buildings were made and how they leaned. And
but then the snow itself on the ground. I mean, it kept accumulating.
It got difficult to walk around. Yeah, it almost took the fun out of it.
Right. During that time period, now at 10, I know that things would. You hadn't had the paper route yet, so probably the next year. Do you remember other snow times? Maybe not that big, but maybe when you were delivering the paper, just the businesses in general. Any other memories tied to that?
There were 4 or 5 times that we had enough snow that I couldn't ride my bicycle, and I'd have to walk my route. And those were long days. But most of the time there was no school that day, so the fact that it only made me late getting the paper out, it didn't mess up anything, else. But
and you were late only because it took you longer to trudge through the snow.
Then it would have been on the bicycle.
Right.
Yeah. See, like I said, I delivered the Greensboro Daily News. Now, the footprint of the Winston-Salem Journal in those days was far, far stronger than the Greensboro Daily News was. Matter of fact, the Greensboro Daily News was gone years before the Winston-Salem Journal started kind of abandoning this area. But so I had a lot larger area to cover with my 78 customers than a Winston-Salem route would with 300 customers. But it was just I couldn't get a Winston-Salem route, so I got the one I could get, And but that paper route, still, I mean, it doesn't matter what stories I tell. If I get around to that, I'm thankful for that, because I made friends that I've kept for the rest of their lives, literally. And only in the last few years of my final customers have died. And but folks, it just the most pleasant thing. And I learned so much, about kindness. I learned a lot about, somebody's not going to pay you, and they're going to lie to you about it, and sure enough, just is a lot of life lessons in it,
right.
And so it's just, but back to the wintertime, I don't have hardly anything to share about snow and wintertime except that one winter when it's all we could ever dream or remember about it. It was just such a
all-encompassing, wasn't it?
Maybe the right word, an anomaly. I don't know what it'd be exactly.
Sure, it would be.
But yeah, that's and I think it'll be fascinating as you. And you said you talked to a few people about that particular time, and they nodded. Oh yeah, I remember that.
Right.
I remember that. And but it was just amazing. And I don't think there was any great harm done to anybody. I don't think we didn't have buildings collapsing or anything like that I can recall hearing about. But it just slowed everything down to a crawl.
But still a great time to be a kid. Right?
Oh yeah. And any time you was a kid on Henshaw Street, it is a good time to be a kid because it was a great place to grow up.
Yeah. Wow. Wilkes County's, I guess, greatest snow in history.
Certainly in my history of Wilkes County, yeah.
Well, Ken, does anything else matter?
That's about it.
Well, that's great, Ken. Well, behind you there's a sled, a boggin. Tim calls it a boggin. What do you call it?
Toboggan.
A toboggan.
Toboggan.
What's it? When I say
it is a toboggan.
Yeah. Is there anything else that's a toboggan?
Just the ones you put on your head.
You see, that was it, So when we were talking about, I said, I think the Wilkes Hardware has a sled. I'll bring that in, see if they'll let us borrow it, and we'll put it in the back behind Ken as a prop. So that's where it is, right behind you now. You come in, of course, and see it and said, well, that's not what we had. You had ones with rails, right?
Yeah.
You didn't have a toboggan. Well, you probably wore one on your head, but you didn't have one under your feet.
No.
So that was it. Tim, that was your thing up in New York?
Oh, yeah.
So,
that and snowshoes.
So toboggans and snow. Now, snowshoes, do you mean the boots or the ones with...
They look like tennis rackets.
They look like tennis rackets. You never saw that around Wilkes County.
Never saw that.
No.
We wore what my dad called galoshes.
Galoshes?
Yeah. and
we had those too.
And they had these clamps on them, and if you got them on the wrong feet, you looked like a duck and all that, But
if you walk like a duck.
But those. But they did the job. You could put your hard shoe on and put inside that, and it kept your feet warm.
So it was like a covering. Covering for your shoe.
But it was the time we'd get home, those what they call Arctics was the name brand of one of them, Arctic. And time we got home, those Arctics would be so full of snow down in there. Your shoe was soaking wet, and your feet.
So it's just packed your.
Yeah, it was no way there. You'd had to have hip waders on. If I'd had hip waders from somebody doing trout fishing, I could have kept my feet dry. But that's about it.
Ann Graves, you could borrow hers. She's a fly fishing lady.
Beats all I've ever heard. Huh?
Yeah.
She gives them all back.
Yeah.
Just enjoys catching them.
Yeah, that's a good thing. thing. That's a real good thing. Well, Ken, this has been a fantastic story. I knew, first we were going to do some Christmas things, and then I said, well, what about the weather and the snow? And then you come up with that story. I was like, wow, that's a really great piece of history, and it's weather history. It's, things change all the time, and I don't know. I think we all like to see a little snow come around.
Oh, it's beautiful. As my dad would say, it's nice to see it come. It's nice to see it go.
That's right. I think it's 5-6 years ago we were in town doing a Christmas special, and we were
Christmas Magic.
Christmas Magic is what it was called. And we were filming late at night and early morning. And
1:30 in the morning.
Yeah, 1:30 in the morning. And then in the morning, and the streets on Main Street, North Wilkesboro, you probably were sleeping then. It was, I don't know, probably a foot of snow or something like that. So we got out and filmed before, anybody got on it, that type of thing. Maybe there's one car or something came through. And I don't know if you remember Spot, our little
I love
dog.
Spot.
Spot's a great dog. So he decided he wanted to go out, and he put his coat on. He went out, and his up to about over his back. So he trotted along a little bit, and what a wonderful thing. And we were filming in a piece in North Wilkesboro, and Dale Isom, this was before his current public office, but Dale, we met in front of the 1915, and that night there was music. We were recording with was it the Kruger brothers?
Yes.
I think the Kruger brothers. The house was packed, but it was time for us to go outside and do our piece. I had my overcoat on, and it was snowing. And because this was earlier, so the big snow hadn't hit, and it was just like magic, So the show was appropriately named Christmas Magic because it absolutely snowed, and we weren't searching for it. It just snowed as if on cue, and it was perfect, for that piece. So I guess there is a little magic to snow.
And as much as I enjoyed riding a sled as a kid, and I have ridden some with my children, although I didn't like it. It's sort of like riding rides at Carowinds. I never told them I was terrified, but I did, but I was.
Right.
But anyway, but now just to be in the snow when it is snowing is just a real treat when it does happen.
Yeah,
it really
that's
is.
right.
Yeah.
It's getting a little chilly now, isn't it?
Well,
feel it?
all I've got short pants, and you got it in here like it's cold in here. Yes.
But for those who don't know Ken Welborn's stylish decor, and I call it decor because people talk about it, and you never wear long pants.
Don't own any.
Don't own any long pants. I'm not going to ask why. Let's just leave that a mystery because and you wear blue shoes.
No, be red.
It'd be red shoes. I've never seen you without red shoes on.
Well, I hadn't worn anything but that for years. I've got all kinds of colors of old Converse All-Stars. I love them, but just sort of settled on the red one some time ago, and I like them and wear them out, and I save them. I've probably got 50 pair of them. I'm going to make me a shoe tree one of these days, like out of that Big Fish movie.
Maybe that's maybe the red shoes and your unique personality is your nod to the Christmas season.
Yeah, well, it's always festive.
Yeah,
and I don't take down my Christmas tree.
Yeah,
I have one of those little aluminum trees from the '60s that my mother had. I've got the box it came in, $8.95 from Rosie down on the corner. And every time I see it, I smile because my mother put that thing up years after they were out of style because my brother T had given it to her, and she didn't want to hurt his feelings by not using his tree. She was just a good soul. And she made, and with her. I'd be remiss if I didn't say what a blessing my mother was at Christmas time. But we'd go out on Christmas Eve and cut a tree and bring it in, a little cedar tree from across from the graveyard across the hill. Yeah. And I would string popcorn. Endless time I spent stringing popcorn to make, and she'd put the little tinsel garlands on them. Right. And then when it was about the middle of January, a little later, take that tree down, we had to take every strand of that garland back off and put it back in a box. Wow. She saved everything. She was the ultimate recycler.
Right.
The ultimate recycler.
That's wonderful. Well, just like that, Ken, you shared a Christmas story.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, we got to get out here before we freeze to death. Ken, I'll see you next time, buddy.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Always glad to be here.
All right. Stay warm, everybody. It's snowing outside.
That's what I heard.
It is.
Yeah.
And inside.
Thank you for spending time with us on Life in Wilkes. We value you as a viewer and appreciate when you share the show with your friends and family. Be sure to bookmark our channel and join us again on the next episode of Life in Wilkes.